Good evening and welcome to Spaceflight Now's live coverage of the launch of SpaceX's Starlink 4-12 mission. You're looking at a live view of Space Launch Complex 40 at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station in Florida, where SpaceX's Falcon 9 rocket is currently vertical, awaiting the start of propellant loading, and then ultimately launch. Liftoff is scheduled for 12:42 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time. That's 4:42 a.m. UTC for those of you in other time zones. The launch was delayed a bit by about an hour and 19 minutes earlier this evening. The launch was initially scheduled for 11:23 p.m. Eastern Time. However, due to some thunderstorms that were in the area, SpaceX elected to target the backup window that the company has available tonight for this mission. So that backup opportunity is scheduled for 12:42 a.m. and 30 seconds, 12:42:30 Eastern Daylight Time. And again, that's 4:42 UTC. This mission will be carrying a batch of 53 Starlink internet satellites into orbit. The Falcon 9 will head downrange, heading northeast from Space Launch Complex 40 out over the Atlantic Ocean to place these 53 satellites into the Starlink network. This is SpaceX's third Starlink mission of the month, as the rapid build out of this commercial internet network continues, with launches on a near weekly basis so far this year. Again, tonight's launch is scheduled in 48 minutes from now at 12:42 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time, or 4:42 UTC. The next major milestone in the countdown will be the start of propellant loading. That is expected around 12:07 a.m. Eastern Time, around 12 or 13 minutes from now, when kerosene and liquid oxygen will begin loading into the two-stage Falcon 9 rocket that you're seeing now live out at Pad 40. Now, just inside of the 41-minute point in tonight's countdown, we just heard a report from Kennedy Space Center safety officials that the weather advisories that were in effect earlier this evening due to lightning and thunderstorms in the area, those have been allowed to expire. So skies overhead right now are partly cloudy. You can see the moon shining through some high-level clouds over the Space Coast of Florida. A few stars are visible, however, the sky coverage certainly is mostly cloudy, I would say, at this hour. So the Falcon 9 will not be heading into clear skies tonight. It will be disappearing into a cloud deck as it heads downrange with these 53 Starlink satellites on board. Now approaching T-minus 40 minutes. In the next few minutes, SpaceX's launch conductor and launch director will poll their teams for approval to enter the terminal countdown and to begin the automatic sequence. That sequencer will begin at T-minus 35 minutes, at which point super chilled densified kerosene and liquid oxygen propellants will begin loading into the Falcon 9 out at pad 40. That again is scheduled to get underway at T-minus 35 minutes, less than 5 minutes from this moment. Now at T-minus 37 minutes, we're standing by for an update from SpaceX's launch team on the status of that go, no go poll that leads into the start of the auto sequence and propellant loading. So we'll stand by for word from SpaceX. We should hear that shortly. So as you can see, the countdown has passed inside of 35 minutes. However, there is no word from SpaceX at this time on the status of the launch attempt and the countdown. We typically hear a word from the launch director about the outcome of that pre-launch poll, and then confirmation from a SpaceX launch team member on the audio net that the auto sequence has begun. We did not hear that at T-minus 35 minutes, so we'll stand by for a word from SpaceX on the status of the countdown. Now T-minus 31 minutes, and the first sign of venting is now visible at the base of the Falcon 9 booster out at pad 40, indicating that propellant loading has begun and everything appears to be on track for liftoff of the Falcon 9 on the Starlink 4-12 mission at 12:42 a.m. Eastern Time or 4:42 a.m. UTC. Again, SpaceX targeting liftoff of the Falcon 9 with 53 Starlink internet satellites on board. This operation out at pad 40 isn't the only thing going on tonight at Cape Canaveral. A few miles to the north at launch pad 39B, NASA's Space Launch System for the Artemis 1 test flight rolled out of the vehicle assembly building on Thursday evening for an overnight 11-hour trip out to pad 39B. It's now spending its first full night out at the launch pad after rolling out of the VAB on Thursday night. NASA ground teams are preparing the rocket for a wet dress rehearsal. That's essentially a practice countdown during which the launch team will load cryogenic propellants into the rocket, run through a simulated countdown to check out all of the systems on board the launch vehicle, as well as the Orion spacecraft on top and various ground systems, all setting the stage for a real launch of the Artemis 1 mission later this spring. That launch currently targeted for no earlier than May, but the launch windows in June and July may be more likely to be targeted. NASA is going to set a launch date for this Artemis 1 mission, which is the first full-up test flight of the SLS and Orion vehicles, leading up to an eventual return of humans to the moon later this decade. This mission will not carry any astronauts on board, but it's a critical test flight to lay the groundwork for future crew flights to the moon. Now looking again at pad 40, where SpaceX's Falcon 9 rocket is loaded with 53 Starlink internet satellites, awaiting launch at 12:42 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time. Now, T-minus 26 minutes and 34 seconds and counting, you're seeing more signs of venting out at pad 40. And soon you'll likely see some frost build up on that first stage booster. That first stage is covered in soot and markings from its previous 11 trips to space. This booster is designated booster number 1051 and will be going for its record 12th flight to space today. That'll be making it the fleet leader in SpaceX's inventory of Falcon 9 boosters. At the top of that Falcon 9 rocket is the second stage of the vehicle, which is a brand new part of the vehicle. It's brand new for every Falcon 9 launch, the only major part that's not reusable. And then above that is the payload fairing. That fairing is containing 53 Starlink satellites for launch this morning, 12:42 a.m., just after midnight, local time here in Florida. This view, this image is a file photo from a previous Starlink flight showing a stack of these flat panel, flat packed satellites are ready for encapsulation inside the payload fairing of a Falcon 9 rocket. Again, this image is from a previous mission showing one half of that clamshell-like nose cone ready to go around those Starlink internet satellites. So there are 53 satellites on board this mission, and each spacecraft weighs a little more than a quarter ton. They're flat packed and held down onto the rocket by a set of 4 retention rods, and those retention rods actually release at the moment of spacecraft separation. That allows those 53 satellites to gently glide away from the Falcon 9 upper stage in orbit all at once, and then they naturally spread out over time. Each spacecraft is fitted with a solar panel to generate electricity, and also carries a krypton ion thruster to change its orbit and begin climbing into its operational orbit, 335 miles or 540 kilometers above Earth at an inclination of 53.2 degrees to the equator. SpaceX builds these satellites on an assembly line in Redmond, Washington, building more than 50 satellites a week at sometimes, just to keep up with the demand for SpaceX's network, launching oftentimes launching 50 to 60 satellites per week. This image shows what a Starlink user terminal looks like. Starlink currently has more than 100,000 customers around the world. This square-shaped dish allows the customer to hook up with the Starlink network, and then the phased array antenna inside this terminal automatically tracks Starlink satellites as they go overhead, receiving and sending signals to and from those satellites to keep the user connected to the internet. And SpaceX's Starlink network is optimized for high bandwidth, low latency connections to the internet. And SpaceX says the network is best suited for those who are in rural areas and disconnected from conventional terrestrial fiber networks, helps connect the unconnected essentially to the internet. Now approaching T-minus 23 minutes and counting. More frost is now visible building up on that first stage airframe. This is typical because that liquid oxygen that's being loaded into the first stage right now is chilled to several hundred degrees below zero. And that super cold propellant, that super cold oxidizer, causes frost and ice to form on the outer skin of the Falcon 9 first stage. The four structures you see on either side of the rocket are lightning towers. Those protect the rocket from any lightning strikes that may occur when it's vertical out on the pad. There was some lightning in the area earlier this evening. .442 UTC. The countdown has now passed inside of 20 minutes, and you're seeing now the so-called big vent from the Falcon 9 Strongback. This is gaseous oxygen that's being vented away from the rocket at this time. This signals the point in the countdown at which the second stage is fully loaded with its load of kerosene fuel. And then once that's complete, SpaceX's automated countdown sequencer issues commands to begin purging and chilling and thermally conditioning the liquid oxygen lines that run up the length of that Strongback structure just to the right of the rocket. And that prepares for the loading of liquid oxygen into the second stage That's due to begin at T-minus 16 minutes or so. So right now, that kerosene tank on stage 2 should be full. Kerosene and liquid oxygen continue loading into stage 1. And liquid oxygen should begin loading into stage 2 in less than 3 minutes. The countdown clock is now passing T-minus 15 minutes and 35 seconds. That venting from the Strongback just cut off a few moments ago, signaling the start of the end of the chill down process and the start of actual liquid oxygen loading into the second stage. The first stage of this rocket, again, as I mentioned earlier, is making its 12th trip to space on this mission. This will extend the reuse record that SpaceX has set with previous boosters and other boosters in the fleet of 11 missions. So this mission will make this booster number 1051, the fleet leader for SpaceX's Falcon 9 rocket. It first flew to space back in March of 2019 with the Crew Dragon Demo 1 mission. That was the uncrewed, unpiloted test flight of the Crew Dragon spacecraft to the International Space Station, paving the way for future crew missions. It flew again in June of 2019 from California, Vandenberg Space Force Base, with Canadian RadarSat satellites on board. It's flown on 8 different Starlink missions, as you can see in this chart, as well as the launch of the Sirius XM radios SXM7, a radio broadcasting satellite from Pad 40, the same pad it's launching from tonight, back in December 2020. Its most recent flight was the Starlink 4-4 mission from Vandenberg Space Force Base on December 18th of last year. And then this booster was shipped across the country to be readied for tonight's flight. Now T-minus 14 minutes, just inside of the 14-minute point in the countdown. You're looking again at a live view of pad 40, where the Falcon 9 is being loaded with propellants for liftoff at 12:42 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time, or 4:42 a.m. UTC, with 53 more Starlink internet satellites on board the Falcon 9 for liftoff this evening, or this morning rather. Now T-minus 12 minutes and 50 seconds. Some stats on tonight's mission, which is designated as Starlink 4-12. This is the 145th flight of a Falcon 9 rocket since 2010. It's the 153rd flight of the Falcon rocket family. That includes the Falcon 1 and Falcon Heavy vehicles since 2006. It's the 12th flight for this particular booster number 1051. And it's the 82nd Falcon 9 rocket to have launched from pad 40 at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. It's the 137th flight overall from this launch complex, including its previous configuration as a Titan launch pad for the Air Force's Titan family of rockets. It's the 85th flight of a reused Falcon booster, and it's the 41st dedicated Falcon 9 launch for the Starlink network, dating back to the first Starlink dedicated launch in May of 2019. It's the 11th SpaceX Falcon 9 launch of the year, and it's the 12th launch from Cape Canaveral in 2022, including 9 previous SpaceX missions, 2 previous United Launch Alliance Atlas V flights, and 1 flight by Astra using its small satellite launch vehicle back in February. Now, just the T-11 point, on this mission, SpaceX's Falcon 9 rocket will head on a trajectory toward the northeast from Slick 40 at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. The red line in this map shows the expected flight track of the Falcon 9 as it heads downrange. This is a switchback to the northeast trajectories that were familiar to many of our viewers for previous Starlink missions. Back in January, SpaceX started launching missions, Starlink flights to the southeast to allow for better recovery conditions at the drone ship location near the Bahamas during the winter months. But as spring and summer approach, SpaceX has switched back to the northeast trajectory. This allows the Falcon 9 to carry a few more Starlink satellites on each mission, because when it heads to the southeast, it has to use some of its performance, some of its propellant to perform a steering maneuver to fly around the Bahamas. So this is a straight shot to the northeast with these satellites tonight. This shows the expected launch timeline. The Falcon 9 will break the sound barrier in about a minute. The first stage will detach from the second stage 2.5 minutes after liftoff, and then separate to begin its descent back to the drone ship. Just read the instructions, parked around 400 miles downrange from Cape Canaveral. The second stage will fire its Merlin engine on 2 burns to place the satellites into the expected deployment orbit. These Starlink satellites will be separated from the Falcon 9 upper stage 62 minutes after liftoff. This is the target orbit for tonight's mission. It'll range between 189 miles and 197 miles in altitude at an inclination of 53.2 degrees. This is the one of 5 orbital shells that SpaceX is deploying Starlink satellites into. And most of the recent missions have targeted this shell at 53.2 degrees inclination to the equator. And again, those Starlink satellites will use their onboard propulsion to reach their operating orbit at 335 miles. That'll take several weeks to months, and then they'll begin operational commercial internet service. Now, T-minus 8 minutes and 22 seconds. Now inside of T-minus 4 minutes. A few minutes ago, the thermal conditioning process for the Merlin main engines on the first stage began. That involves flowing small amounts of liquid oxygen through those engine components to condition them for their performance and their burns during tonight's mission. The Falcon 9 is also fully loaded at this time with 46,000 gallons of rocket-grade kerosene, also called RP1. Liquid oxygen will continue loading until around T-minus 2 minutes. And the latest milestone in the countdown has been the retraction of Strongback, just right of the Falcon 9 in this view of pad 40. That is retracting to a position around 1.5 degrees away from the Falcon 9. And then at liftoff, the Strongback structure, also the transporter erector, will swing back to a farther location, farther from the rocket, to allow the Falcon 9 to begin its vertical climb into space. Now T-minus 2 minutes and 45 seconds. Now inside of 2 minutes to go, 2 minutes to launch. Now T-minus 30 seconds. SpaceX's Falcon 9 rocket is now in startup mode. This transitions the rocket to internal power, and in the final minute of the countdown, the Falcon 9 will be pressurized. Its propellant tanks will be pressurized for flight. Now around 15 seconds to go in the countdown. And liftoff. Liftoff SpaceX's Falcon 9 rocket heading to space on the Starlink 4-12 mission, carrying 53 more Starlink internet satellites into orbit. The Falcon 9 has now disappeared into a low cloud deck over Cape Canaveral at this time, but the rumble quite apparent now from those 9 Merlin main engines. Very loud rumble now passing over our location at Kennedy Space Center. Falcon 9 heading downrange northeast from Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. This Falcon 9 booster making its 12th trip to space, setting a new record in rocket reusability. Big rumble from the Merlin engines now audible here on the Space Coast of Florida. The clouds overhead glowing orange as the Falcon 9 heads downrange. We're now switching to SpaceX's feed, which is on a slight delay of a few seconds. So you're now seeing views from the Falcon 9 as it climbs into space. Now, more than 2 minutes into the flight, we expect to see main engine cutoff in around 30 seconds or so. But again, SpaceX's feed does come with some latency. There is a delay in the feed that you're seeing from real time. You're now seeing a split screen view from onboard cameras on the Falcon 9's first stage and second stage on the left. Well, now a view now of the payload fairing jettisoning. So we've had a good separation of the Falcon 9 first stage, ignition of the Merlin vacuum engine on stage 2, and jettison of that payload fairing. The Falcon 9 now in space, just past the 100-kilometer mark. So it's past the von Karman line. The left-hand view shows a downward-facing camera from the first stage. You can see flashes of lightning visible here along the coast of Florida. Those storms are the ones that just passed over our location at Kennedy Space Center earlier this evening. Beautiful view showing those lightning flashes as the Falcon 9 booster soars overhead, heading for the drone ship downrange in the Atlantic. On the right side, you see that glowing red-hot engine bell on the Merlin vacuum engine as it fires into orbit with 53 satellites for the Starlink network. Now 5.5 minutes into the flight of the Falcon 9 on the Starlink 4-12 mission, continuing to see the Falcon 9 booster. It's now making its descent back into the atmosphere, heading for an entry burn using 3 of its Merlin engines, and then a final landing burn before targeting a touchdown on the drone ship. Just read the instructions, around 400 miles northeast of Cape Canaveral, or roughly due east of Charleston, South Carolina. Meanwhile, the second stage is continuing its burn to place these 53 satellites into orbit. You can see that entry burn on the stage 1 now underway. 3 engines, 3 of those Merlin engines have reignited to help slow down the booster for reentry. And there's an engine shutdown, the entry burn now complete. Now less than a couple of minutes to go until landing of that first stage, around the same time as the second stage finishes its engine burn to place the 53 Starlink internet satellites into a parking orbit. Landing of that first stage should be coming in just a few seconds time. Now you're seeing that landing burn underway on the left side from an onboard camera, the right side showing the deck of the drone ship. Just read the instructions. Booster coming in for its 12th landing. And that feed cut out, as it sometimes does with the touchdown of the first stage. And there it is. Booster number 1051 on the deck of Just Read the Instructions. This completes this booster's 12th flight to space. New record for SpaceX's Falcon 9 fleet. And SpaceX has now confirmed the shutdown of the Merlin vacuum engine. The Merlin vacuum engine completing its 6-minute burn to place these 53 Starlink satellites into a parking orbit. Another burn still to come around T plus 45 minutes to circularize that orbit for deployment of the Starlink satellites. That deployment expected at T plus 62 minutes. So a good initial start to SpaceX's 11th flight of the year. The Falcon 9 has reached orbit with these 53 satellites on board after a climb into space from Pad 40 at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. So now around 11 minutes into the flight, you can see this map shows the location that the Falcon 9 upper stage is flying, heading roughly parallel to the eastern seaboard of the United States. It'll head out over the Atlantic Ocean, then over Europe, and then out over the Indian Ocean, ultimately for that restart of the Merlin vacuum engine. So with the Falcon 9 in orbit, you're still seeing some live views here from the Falcon 9's onboard cameras, this showing the stack of 53 Starlink satellites riding that Falcon 9, coasting now across the Atlantic Ocean. Ultimately, the Falcon 9's Merlin engine that you're seeing here will reignite for about 1 second to reshape its orbit, this rocket's orbit, into the proper altitude and inclination for separation of those 53 satellites. That's scheduled to occur around 62 minutes after liftoff, or around 1:44 a.m. Eastern Time, or 5:44 a.m. UTC. So other activities going on here on Florida Space Coast tonight include operations out at Launch Complex 39B at Kennedy Space Center, where NASA's Space Launch System, standing 322 feet or 98 meters tall, was rolled out to this launch complex overnight Thursday into Friday. It's now spending its first full night on Pad 39B since its big debut after emerging from the vehicle assembly building shortly before sunset Thursday. It was quite an event. Lots of VIPs and news media gathered here at Kennedy Space Center to watch that rollout. The first time the fully assembled, the fully stacked Space Launch System has been visible. It's now out at Pad 39B going through some checkouts. The ground team out there is busy connecting various systems between the rocket, its mobile launch platform, and the launch pad ground systems themselves, all leading up to a wet dress rehearsal in early April. This wet dress rehearsal is a simulated countdown where NASA's launch team over in the Launch Control Center, just a few miles from the pad, will oversee the loading of cryogenics into the rocket. Liquid hydrogen fuel, liquid oxygen will be loaded into both stages of the Space Launch System. And then the countdown will proceed down to around the T-minus 10-second point when it will be terminated and cut off just before ignition of the 4 RS-25 engines at the base of that first stage. This is a key test, a key checkout of the rocket ahead of its launch later this year on the Artemis 1 mission. Artemis 1 is the first test flight for NASA's Artemis program, which aims to return astronauts to the moon later this decade. Astronauts will ride future Space Launch System rockets and Orion spacecraft, just like the one you see here, to the moon. So this is a big moment for NASA's exploration program to see this giant super heavy lift rocket roll out to the pad for the first time. It's the most powerful rocket NASA has ever built, with 8.8 million pounds of thrust at liftoff. That's more than the Saturn V moon rocket. And like I said, it stands 322 feet tall. That's around 40 feet shy of the Saturn V's total height. An impressive rocket out on Pad 39B on the skyline of Kennedy Space Center right now, lit up by spotlights. It was pretty neat to see the Falcon 9 rocket launch actually heading northeast from our vantage point out over toward Pad 39B as it climbed into space. Looking ahead for some upcoming launches that we have confirmed dates for. There may be other launches during this time period that we don't have confirmed dates for at this point. Now, T plus 27 minutes, just past the 27-minute point since liftoff of the Falcon 9 rocket on the Starlink 4-12 mission. The rocket now coasting over Turkey, or the Black Sea rather, approaching Turkey, and then it'll pass down over the Middle East, heading southeast over the Indian Ocean for a second burn of the Merlin engine on the upper stage at T plus 45 minutes. So with this launch away, let's look ahead to future launch schedule over the next few weeks. Next up on the schedule with a confirmed date that we know of is the March 22nd launch of a Russian Soyuz rocket from the Plesetsk Cosmodrome in northern Russia. That'll be carrying a Russian military Meridian M communications satellite to orbit. Following that is a series of 3 Falcon 9 missions from SpaceX's 3 operational launch pads. On April 1st, the Falcon 9 is set to lift off from the same pad that was used for tonight's mission, Slick 40 at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. That'll be carrying the Transporter 4 rideshare mission to orbit, heading to a polar sun-synchronous orbit. This mission will head south, flying parallel to Florida's east coast, bound for a polar orbit with a number of commercial and government satellites, small satellites. And this again being SpaceX's 4th transporter rideshare mission. Following that, no earlier than April 3rd, another Falcon 9 is scheduled to launch from Launch Complex 39A at Kennedy Space Center on the Axiom Mission 1 flight, the first all-private, all-commercial human space flight to the International Space Station. That'll be commanded by former NASA astronaut Mike Lopez Alegria, along with 3 paying passengers. These are customers of Axiom Space, a company based in Houston that's procuring space tourist flights to the space station, to the International Space Station, under an agreement with NASA. Axiom, in the long run, aims to build its own commercial space habitat, a commercial space station that could serve as a replacement to the ISS when the ISS is retired. So this is a first mission that Axiom Space will be managing to the International Space Station to help lay the groundwork for a commercial economy in low Earth orbit. Following that, on April 15th, another Falcon 9, another SpaceX mission, is scheduled to launch from Vandenberg Space Force Base in California. This will carry a classified cargo into orbit for the National Reconnaissance Office, which is the owner of the U.S. government's fleet of spy satellites or intelligence gathering satellites in Earth orbit. So these are the next 4 launches with confirmed dates. There may be a few more scattered here in this next month that we don't have confirmed dates for this time, so we didn't include it on this list. But these are the next 4 that we'll be covering that we have confirmed dates for this time. Now, just past the T plus 30-minute mark, Falcon 9 continuing its coast through low Earth orbit, heading to a restart of that second stage engine, followed by separation of the 53 Starlink internet satellites at 1:44 a.m. Eastern Time, or 5:44 UTC. We're going to end our live commentary at this point with this shot of Pad 40, the empty launch pad where the Falcon 9 departed some 31 minutes ago, heading to space on the Starlink 4-12 mission with 53 internet satellites on board. This was a record-setting mission with the first stage booster flying on its 12th trip to space. The reusable first stage, standing around 15 stories tall, made its supersonic descent back into the atmosphere and nailed its landing on SpaceX's drone ship. Just read the instructions in the Atlantic Ocean east of Charleston, South Carolina. So we'll bring you an update on the end of tonight's mission on our social media feeds on Facebook, on Twitter, as well as on our homepage, spaceflightnow.com, on our website. So check all those media out for an update on the outcome of the Starlink 4-12 mission, as well as future coverage of upcoming launches. Again, we've mentioned the Space Launch System several times tonight. That rocket over on Pad 39B will be covering its stay on Pad 39B over the next few weeks, as well as its countdown dress rehearsal in early April. So until next time, I'm Stephen Clark from spaceflightnow.com, reporting live from NASA's Kennedy Space Center in Florida. Have a great night. Have a great weekend. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you next time.